Welcome to the Hockey Writers Sabres Scoop, a weekly show with our top Buffalo Sabres writing crew, bringing you the latest news, rumors, trades, player grades, game results, and much more. From training camp to the playoffs, from draft day to the trade deadline, our team covers everything that happens with the Sabres. So get a pen and paper and turn up the volume. You're about to get the Sabres Scoop. Sabres Scoop.
Welcome to Sabres Scoop, presented by the Hockey Writers, a once-a-week show covering all things Buffalo Sabres and NHL hockey. He's Brandon Seltenrich. I'm Jordan Jacklin. We're getting right into it here with our Buffalo Sabres news from this past week. As it currently sits in the standings, the Sabres are 7-6-2, a far cry from how good, obviously awesome they were doing at the beginning of the year. They were like 5-1. Not so well recently, definitely not tonight, as they lost 5-0 to the Calgary Flames. They currently got 16 points, so that's good for 6 out of 8 teams in the Atlantic Division, and they're 22nd now in terms of overall league standings. So the record through 15 games puts the Sabres above NHL 500, and it's much higher, obviously, than what people were expecting coming into the year because, you know, Jack Eichel's gone now. All these other guys like Ristolainen and Reinhart are gone. We expected them to be contending for Shane Wright, and at this moment, I mean, nobody's going to be passing Arizona in that regard. So, I mean, they're obviously doing better than expected, but you're starting to see them come a little bit more down to earth. And is this new culture that we can kind of see here every game, all thanks to Don Granato, you know, because they're obviously in it every game. I mean, tonight wouldn't really show it, but when you're looking at all these games, Brandon, is there just something about Don Granato's culture that he instills and the systematics that he employs that really gets the most out of the players on this roster?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, from the opening night, right? And they got off to a really hot start, so a lot of people were probably more optimistic than they are now. But you know, I'm an optimist all the way through, and I really do try to take the good things from the games, even like a spanking like they had tonight. But I mean, Don Granato, just the way he composes himself and the way the players have played under him, they just look like they enjoy playing the game again. I know it's a often repeated cliche to say something like that, but even the players have said it themselves that they feel like they can play to their strengths. They can really work on the skills that they want to work on, and they can play the way they enjoy playing. And when you match them up with other players who complement that skill set, you're going to get the results. And you see the chemistry being built. You see players like Jeff Skinner. I mean, he had a 3.9 against the Maple Leafs, even though they lost. I mean, you're seeing things like that, the players returning to form. And so I really do think Don Granato should take a lot of the credit for that. Even though, you know, right now I think they fall to 7-7-2, but after tonight's game, but I still think that's a fine place to be. And it's really impressive in my mind.
Yeah, I gotta agree with you. You know, like nobody expected the Sabres to be about 520 games to the season. So they're doing well so far. I mean, I don't obviously expect them to make the playoffs, but they're going to be in every game. That's ultimately the type of culture they're looking to employ here. And with that kind of in mind, you know, like we're talking about this team kind of exceeding expectations. There's been a lot of players on this roster that have been overperforming in my eyes. I want to get some of your perspective here. Which players in particular have stood out so far throughout the first quarter of the season?
Yeah, I really want to say that Tage Thompson has stood out to me. And in addition to Tage Thompson, I want to add Jeff Skinner into that conversation. So one younger player and one more experienced player. I just mentioned how Skinner had a multi-point night the other night, and just the way that he's played and bouncing back after an insanely bad season like last season. I mean, there were storylines. Everybody was talking about the $9 million price tag for 0 goals halfway through the season, and it was really bad. And so it's Skinner to be scoring and producing, not at a record-setting pace, but at a respectable pace. It really gives me some hope that, you know, with a first line center, if Middlestat comes back, say that he could really step up even more at that point. And then Tage Thompson was the other one. I feel like every other night he's at least getting on the score sheet. And for a player like him, moving him to center, maybe that's doing him some good at the NHL level. And I think that in his more reduced role, I mean, he's playing third line center on most nights. That's a pretty good spot for him. And so I'm happy to see that the last remaining piece, other than Ryan Johnson of that Ryan O'Reilly trade, is producing a little bit at the NHL level. So those would be my two off the top of my head. Other ones, Craig Anderson, but we haven't seen him in a while. But I'm interested to hear what you think.
Well, I definitely got to agree with your Skinner and Thompson selections. I mean, Thompson as a center has clearly worked out better than when he was as a wing, and he's doing well against top 6 competition. Looking at another center on this roster who was terrific this past week against the likes of Austin Matthews, Sidney Crosby. It's just ridiculous that he did this well, and Connor McDavid, I should add. Dylan Cousins. putting up 2 goals, 3 points in 3 games. Not only that, but looking at some of the micro stats like expected goals for, Corsi for percentage, he came out on top in 52 and 55 percentile range, I believe. So he was actually driving the play really well, and he was able to limit their scoring chances. So like those guys are among the top 10 centers in the whole league. So for Dylan Cousins, who kind of had a slow start to the season, starting to pick it up here a bit, that's very encouraging for the 20-year-old center.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just before we move on to the next thing, what have you thought of the goaltending overall? Because obviously we saw Craig Anderson and he really impressed me. Like I said, if he weren't injured, I would definitely include him in this list. And then you got Dustin Tokarski, who had a huge game the other night against the Pittsburgh Penguins. And then you have Aaron Dell, who's only gotten into one game, lost, didn't look very good. Overall, what do you think of the goaltending so far this season? Because you and I expected it to be a tire fire at the beginning of the year.
Well, obviously Craig Anderson surpassed expectations, but you look at a guy like Aaron Dell, and man, that guy has really fallen from grace. Like that game against the Maple Leafs, like the Sabres were able to come back. They probably should have even been able to win that game, but Aaron Dell just didn't really give them a chance to win there. Dustin Tokarski, who actually had a few decent starts to begin the season, is now starting to fall down to earth. And that kind of makes sense because in my eyes, he's a third, maybe even fourth string goaltender on a Stanley Cup winning team. You know, he really shouldn't even be a backup goalie. So I don't think you're going to be winning too many games with those two in that. And Craig Anderson, who knows how long that success story is going to last, right? The man's 40 years old. So although I think he's going to be able to get the Sabres a chance to win most of the nights, you're going to probably have to see him go through a downward trajectory at some point. And you don't really have another reliable option unless you really want to try thinking that UPL is ready, which it doesn't really appear so yet.
Yeah, that's one young player you don't want to pull up. So I guess we can go to our next topic here, which the Sabres have had a number of pretty significant injuries through just 15 games. And while we've lost the talent of some players, it's also allowed Kevin Adams as GM to get a closer look at some other young players and prospects by calling them up in their place. So just to recap some of the more significant losses, the Sabres lost Casey Middlestat, obviously first line center is where he started in the very first game of the season. That's something I was pretty sad to see, and hopefully he gets back sooner than later. They also lost Victor Olofsson, Henry Jokiharju, and even Craig Anderson, who was really impressing as a starting goalie in a few games. Meanwhile, other players like John Hayden, Arttu Ruotsalainen, one of your favorite players, and even Will Butcher have benefited from the injuries and had a chance to showcase the skills they can bring to the team. So which of these young players or other players in general who have moved up in the lineup since other guys have gone out on injury, which of those players have impressed you the most?
Well, there's a lot of names there. So let's start with the first line. Victor Olofsson is really starting to be consistent with his game this season. He's probably been the best Sabres forward, and he's thriving on the line. You know, him and Jeff Skinner on the line together really look nice together. You've kind of been able to see the chemistry there. And ultimately, I think he's really rounding out his game. He's doing things besides just his shot, which is nice to see. I really like Arttu Ruotsalainen as well, because that guy was like really struggling to begin the year, but you're kind of seeing him, you know, thrive in a bottom six role because it's a different scenario for him. Last year, he was able to play in the top six. Now he has to learn how to play, you know, a different type of game because there's not always going to be those top six opportunities for you. So he's ultimately, you know, after struggling a bit, been able to turn it around. And other guys, you know, generally, I've looked pretty decent. I mean, Henry Jokiharju has actually kind of surprised me a little bit. I feel like I always say that, but I really like his game. I do think he's a future, you know, number 4 D-man consistently in this league. I'm curious to get your thoughts on some of the other guys who's impressed you.
Yeah, I want to add to Victor Olofsson. I mean, it's incredible. He's actually scoring at 5-on-5, even, you know, despite missing some time on injury. That's exactly what you want to see from a guy like him, like you said, rounding out his game. Other than that, I have liked, although they haven't been the most productive, I actually have liked Drake Caggiula and Vinny Hinostroza. I think they've been nice additions to the bottom six on the wings, which is typically where they've been playing. I mean, they got some first line time, believe it or not, but typically they've been moved down in the lineup. And I like when they roll out there. I think they play pretty well. And believe it or not, Kyle Okposo and Cody Eakin are actually carrying some of those bottom lines, and they started off really hot. So did Zemgus Girgensons, and to see that bottom six finally start to contribute, I think Caggiula and Hinostroza have a lot to do that. They had some speed and skill to those, but to that bottom six, so I think they've been good pickups. Of course, Arttu Ruotsalainen is a guy I'd like to see get going a little more as well, but he's also impressed me a little bit. So outside of
a
that,
name where
No,
sorry to cut you off there, but there is a name out there that I don't know why we haven't mentioned him. That's Rasmus Asplund, who's currently leading the Sabres in points. He has 4 goals, 10 points in 15 games. What have you thought of him so far? How has he been able to do this?
Somehow he got lost in the fray when I was talking about all those players, but no, he's definitely someone we have to give a shout out to because he's somebody who, hey, I dedicated a whole article to this guy in a mock expansion draft saying the Sabres have got to make a trade or find a way to protect this player. And I'm really happy I was so hard, so, you know, I was so loyal to him because he's really paid off this year. I mean, he's scoring and he's playing like he could be a really good player in this league. I mean, in the middle six, probably where he would be. I think he's done a really good job, especially not playing with the best line mates. I mean, I think he's really impressed. So for one of their younger forwards who was just on the cusp last year and was really up and down between the Amerks and the Sabres, I think he's been super impressive.
Definitely. And talking about guys being super impressive, we're going to be diving into the NCAA college hockey here to give you a little bit of an update on 2021 first overall pick, Owen Power. So I'm sure unless you've been watching the games or even just following the Michigan Hockey Twitter account, you know that Power just surpassed his point totals from last year. And it's only November. He had 16 points in 26 games last year, and he's already at 18 this year. I got to pose this question for you, Brandon. Is he the best defenseman, if not potentially the best player in college hockey right now?
I I definitely want to say that he could be considered for the best player, at least the best defenseman. I mean, just look at his team. Obviously, the University of Michigan is stacked with not just first round draft picks, but NHL draft picks in general, stacked top to bottom with talent. One of the most dominant teams we've seen in the NCAA scene in a long time. I mean, you think of great teams that have produced great players like North Dakota. I mean, a bunch of guys came out of that school. I think you're going to think the same thing about this Michigan team. And I don't pay as much attention to college hockey as I probably should. But when it comes to Sabres prospects, I think he's definitely been the most impressive in a long time. So in that regard, Power is definitely on the top of my list. Across the whole NCAA, there's just not another defenseman that plays like him. And being touted as highly as he has, for the past season leading up to his draft year, I really think that this is a great sign for the Sabres' future. And just think if they're middling right now in the games that they're playing, about 500 about, just think what he can help do when he comes into the league. So it's super exciting to see.
And it's really nice too, because they're just letting him develop. They didn't rush him at all. I think this is ultimately going to be the best for his development because you're really seeing him thrive here.
Definitely. Yeah. So here's a question for you, actually. Outside of Power, what other prospects and players in the Sabres system have we been keeping an eye on, and who should fans be excited about right now? I know, I mean, you write those Sabres prospects reports. I'm sure they read them. You do a great job. So let's see
Well,
who you're looking
yeah.
at.
You don't have to look too far down. Just looking at the Rochester Americans, their first line consists of JJ Peterka, Peyton Krebs, and Jack Quinn. And Quinn, if you're not paying attention, you should be, because this guy's scoring at just a ridiculous pace. He's already completely crushed his point totals from last year. And the difference between this year and last year as well is he's actually driving the play more, up this 5v5 shot rates, that Chad Dominicus publishes. He's looked like a completely different player, and he's really starting to prove that he's too dominant for the AHL. And that's what you want to see in a player before calling up into the NHL, because if you want to put him in the top 6 role, you have to make sure that you're too good for that league. Peyton Krebs has, been able to find some chemistry with Quinn. He's still kind of adjusting, but JJ Peterka, that's a player you're also going to be seeing on the Sabres at some point. So make sure, get used to it. You hear those names, you're going to be hearing them soon, because Quinn and Peterka for sure will be playing games with the Sabres at some point this season. Potentially Peyton Krebs as well, but that's not a guarantee.
Yeah, I definitely hear you there. Quinn and Peterka, I think, are so exciting to see. Krebs, Adams made it real clear he doesn't want to rush that player, especially when you look at the player that they traded away to get him. So I'm totally fine with that. And I'm fine with taking it slow with all of those guys you just mentioned. But it's so great to see them lighting it up at the AHL level. I've got to get out and watch in an Amerks game very soon to see them in person live. I'm super excited for that.
Definitely. And just one little note to add, UPL Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen actually has looked better the past few weeks here, even at a shutout recently. So he's starting to adjust a little bit better to the AHL game. So I think he'll be all-time Sabre next year potentially. And with that, let's reset the show. You're watching Sabres Scoop presented by the Hockey Writers. Make sure to subscribe to and like the show on YouTube and catch the great hockey content on the hockeywriters.com, as well as our Twitter feed at Sabres Scoop THW. We're heading into our general NHL news here. Lots of stuff happening. We're creeping into Thanksgiving territory. And the general rule is if you're really out of the playoff picture and you're at the bottom of the standings, generally you're probably not making the playoffs. And we're seeing a lot of crazy runs here by teams and specific players. So let's dive into some of the craziest stats we got here, specifically with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. So McDavid, who currently has 10 goals and 29 points in 15 games, who's scoring just under 2 points per game, which would have him on pace for about 160 at season's end. That's a crazy stat right there. And just looking at some other stuff here, the other player, I'm not sure many who would be able to guess who's actually in his territory, Troy Terry of the Anaheim Ducks. He currently is on a 15-game point streak of his own with 11 goals, 10 assists, 21 points in that span. Oh, and by the way, the Anaheim Ducks currently sit first in the Pacific Division, ahead of the Oilers, Flames, and Golden Knights. So looking at some of these streaks here with Connor McDavid, if you got to lump Leon Draisaitl in that category, who's currently outproducing them, by the way, and Troy Terry with the Anaheim Ducks, which of these streaks is more impressive, and who do we think will outlast the other, Brandon?
When it comes to which streak is more impressive of a point streak of 15 plus games, I've got to go with Troy Terry, because for Connor McDavid, I mean, he doesn't do this every day, but he's a player that you expect could do this, produce at a points per game rate of just over 2, on rate for 160 at the end of the season. That's something you expect from a guy like Connor McDavid. Troy Terry of the Anaheim Ducks. I mean, this is a guy whose name we haven't heard much since the World Juniors, and now it seems like he is having a real breakout season, which is really cool to see for the Ducks. And I feel like last week I looked and the Ducks were where I expected them to be in the standings, and then this week they're first in the division. I was like, wait, what happened? And I feel like I haven't heard enough about this 15-game point streak from Troy Terry. So he's definitely the more impressive for me. As for who I think will outlast the other, I've got to go with McDavid just because of that pure skill right there. Although I hope to be proven wrong, because I always love when new players come on the scene, burst onto the scene, and just score a ton of points. It's super awesome to see.
Definitely the best outcome is like a continuous race, for the entire season to see who will like outscore the other. It was not just we're talking about Anaheim here. Ryan Getzlaf, by the way, already has more points than he did last year. He had 17 and 48 in 2020-21. He currently is 18 and 17 at this moment. Just ridiculous. Like the way he's playing, he could be playing himself into Olympic conversation, which is often was kind of crazy to even think about. I don't actually think it's going to happen, but compared to where he was last year in that history, it's definitely possible. Same with Troy Terry. Like he could be playing himself onto Team USA's roster at the moment because he's been that good. And we'll see if Anaheim's able to make the playoffs, because they got guys like Trevor Zegras, who just scored that beauty goal, copied the Jack Hughes celebration yesterday. He's really starting to thrive as well.
Yeah, Ryan Getzlaf, by the way, congrats on that 1,000th NHL point. 96th, 97th player in NHL history to do that. So that's super impressive. He's been in the league a long time. He's done it all. And like you said, if he can crack the Team Canada roster again, I mean, he's been there before. Fourth line center, why not? Maybe if he continues to play like this. But yeah, Anaheim, super exciting team to watch right now. Who would have thought? I thought they were going to be bottoming out again this year, but it seems like they have a pretty decent team over there. But yeah, let's go back to Connor McDavid. It seems like he's been in the news a lot. Other than being on a crazy tear where he's scoring 2 points a game, 29 in 15 games, he's been in the news otherwise because of none other than John Tortorella. You know him, you love him, or you hate him. However you feel about him, you know who he is. So let's rewind a little bit because we didn't actually cover this. John Tortorella made a comment on ESPN on a broadcast about Connor McDavid, and McDavid speaking out about not getting as many calls as he thinks he should. And the long and short of John Tortorella's comments were shut up. So Connor McDavid clapped back in his own way at John Tortorella's comments today in a press conference saying, I guess I should shut up about it when asked if he should be drawing more penalties. So it's his own little way of just clapping back at Torts in this instance. So here's a question. Is this the most personality we've ever seen from Connor McDavid in a press conference? It's kind of funny they asked that question.
Yeah, I mean, NHL players generally aren't the most enthusiastic in press conferences, but if you ever watch a Connor McDavid conference, he doesn't really give much for any of the reporters. So to have that, I saw that tweet today, I think by Ryan Rishog of TSN. I was just like, whoa. Well, I did not expect that at all. So you can tell McDavid's probably just annoyed at the subject in general and probably seeing what Tortorella had to say. Didn't have anything, better for him, because they make his tummy feel better because it's true. Like this topic's been beaten to death. And I can't believe this is still even a topic of conversation because this needs to get changed. Our game needs to grow here. And I hope by playoff time with a team like Edmonton, who's just thriving at this moment, that McDavid's going to be able to draw calls in the playoffs because he didn't draw any penalties, I believe, in the playoffs last year, if my memory recalls. And that just can't be happening because he was getting infracted. He was basically getting beaten live. And that just can't happen.
Yeah, I mean, we all know how the refs tend to not call as many penalties when it comes playoff time, and that's all part of this rhetoric of, hey, we need to let the game be played and just let the players get out there and do their thing. And it can lead to some dangerous situations, especially when you have a player as fast and as skilled as McDavid and he's not getting calls when he's getting hooked, tripped, slew-footed, what have you. And yeah, it can lead to a lot of bad stuff. But what do you think that the refs specifically or other teams or even players themselves can do to help them grow, like you said, in this regard, even as soon as the playoffs this year?
Well, we see at the beginning of every season, there was even a memo sent out to all leagues, all GMs, all players, kind of saying the standard for whether it's a cross check, whether what's a stick infraction. This needs to be clearly known. So they've already established that. Now that has to be consistent throughout September to April. And then once April begins, it's consistent through April to July, until the playoffs end at that rate. They can't change. The standard shouldn't change. I'm not saying you have to be calling soft penalties, but you have to be consistent in what you're calling. Like we shouldn't be getting crazy goals like what happened in 1999 obviously can't happen. I'm sure Sabres fans can recall, and what's happening these past few years, it has to get better. Like the referees have to be calling the play and just calling the rules that you're establishing at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, totally agree with you there.
Definitely. And we got to dive into the Vancouver Canucks a little bit, who are currently not having fun at the moment. Why, per se? Well, let's take a look at the Pacific Division standings. Through 17 games, the Canucks have 5 wins, 10 losses, 2 overtime losses. So they get a couple loser points there. They have 12 points. That puts them 7th in that Pacific Division. They currently only have 3 points more than the Seattle Kraken, who have mightily struggled since entering the league. Diving into the stats a little bit more, they have a negative 16 goal differential and nothing's looking good. They've also lost 5 straight in a row. So not good at all. They're allowing 59 goals against. That's the worst in their division, tied with Seattle. They've only scored 43, tied for second last. LA's worst. They're tied with San Jose for second last there. We got to talk a little bit about this team. What have you noticed from them so far? And why do you think they're struggling?
There's a lot of reasons, a lot of head scratching moves that go back to 2 seasons ago. I mean, letting Tyler Toffoli walk, that was something that a lot of people got upset with management about. Making some real, I don't know if this is too harsh, but real boneheaded signings for players who belong on the 4th line. I mean, I think the goaltending situation is going to take a little while to get better, but I mean, you're relying on Thatcher Demko, who's a rookie right now, so that's who's pretty much a rookie right now, so that's a little tough to do. And then I think what it really boils down to is your top players just aren't getting it done. I mean, aside from Quinn Hughes, who has a ton of assists, I mean, he's almost point per game, although he could do some more as well in terms of goal scoring. But look at Elias Pettersson. I mean, the slow start to the season is really, really slow. And people thought, okay, maybe after 5-10 games will get going. It hasn't gotten going. It's been 17 games. He has 9 points, only 3 goals. That can't happen out of Elias Pettersson. I mean, he's scored 60 plus points twice in his career, and he's got to score at least that again. I mean, I thought it was going to be over 70. This is a guy who's really got to get going. So it's a whole bunch of things, boneheaded management decisions, all the way to players on the ice. I don't watch the Canucks that much, but I do like to keep paying attention to these storylines. So that's what I know. But I'm super interested to hear your take on that.
One thing I got to say here, Jay Fresh's player card, friend of the show, even dropped today. Quinn Hughes is not the problem in Vancouver, averaging over 25 minutes a night at the moment. He's playing like a true number one defenseman. His defense has gotten a lot better, and he's actually, driving the play a little bit more. He's playing much more of his game that we're kind of used to seeing Quinn Hughes play, especially compared to last season where he was kind of so defensively inept. I really liked his rebound there. Niels Höglander, man, more people should talk about this guy. I know his stats aren't necessarily lighting it up, but he's got 5 goals, 9 points in 17 games. And some of those blowout losses, he's the only guy that's actually been trying, and Canucks fans can actually, visibly watch without going like, oh, I can't believe this, So yeah, I mean, it hasn't been easy in Vancouver. Like Connor Garland's fitting pretty well. JT Miller's still lighting it up. The real guy that's really struggling is Elias Pettersson. What's happened to this guy? We watch this guy in the offensive zone on the power play. He's just a constant turnover machine. He's not a number one center at the moment, the way he's playing. So something's just up there with them. And obviously, we already know what the other issues are. Tyler Myers, Tucker Pullman signing. These are the guys you're relying on. Pullman's obviously not that bad, but when you make all of these signings and you're allocating so much of your cap space into these bottom 6 players, bottom pairing defensemen, it's going to catch up to you at some point. And it clearly has for the Canucks. It's very surprising that they're this bad because they really shouldn't be, but that's ultimately where we're at this moment. And the question that's kind of been aroused is Jim Benning, who had to address the media today, talking about in his press conference, we're exploring all avenues, when it comes to potential trades. He's talking to general managers. Should he be trusted to do this? And, would you trust him to make a coaching change at this point, or should he have to go? What's your take there, Brandon?
All it comes down to if he's on the hot seat. Is he on the hot seat with the management? I mean, that's what it comes down to, because if you have a GM halfway out the door, you cannot let him make franchise altering decisions. I don't know what all avenues exactly entails, but if it's the all avenues that Kevin Adams has done in the past year, then it sure as heck entails a lot. So if I were a Vancouver fan, I'd be pretty scared right now. I would say, well, I don't want any of these young guys who should be on the team for, the next 10, 15 years to be traded just to go into win now mode. If we have some retooling to do, let's go ahead and do it. But I don't know if Jim Benning is the guy. I don't know if he should be trusted for it. And a lot of people are calling for his head, and I can understand where they're coming from.
This is what I got to say. He's been there for 8 years. It hasn't gotten better. His rebuild hasn't worked. It's time for him to go. You look at Travis Green's systems and how it's working. I've looked at various stats, like rush chances. I believe the Canucks rank like last in those categories. The systematics don't work there. He has to go. They need to clean house completely. It's all up to ownership to make that happen. I hope for Vancouver fans, because there's obviously great building pieces in Pettersson, Hughes, Besser. Miller's been lights out since coming there. Demko's a great goaltender. I hope they can make it work, but they need to surround them with a good supporting cast in order for that to happen. Is there any last thoughts before we end out the show here, Brandon?
None other than I'm excited to keep watching some competitive Sabres games. I know we're going to have more to talk about when it comes to that. I'm excited to see some of these injured players who have been banged up get back. And I'm enjoying the NHL season so far. There's a ton to like.
Yeah, it's pretty fun to watch, like we said, we're going to be getting past Thanksgiving here soon. We're going to see who the real teams are and who the bottom feeders are. And it's going to be just exciting to watch. I hope the goal scoring at the moment is just so crazy. I hope it continues throughout the rest of the year here. So with that in mind, thank you for watching us, as this has been Sabres Scoop, presented by the Hockey Writers. Make sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube and follow us on our Twitter at Sabres Scoop THW. You also got to make sure you're heading over to morningskate.io to sign up for our daily Morning Skate newsletter, so you don't miss out on that latest and weirdest hockey news coming at you every day. Don't miss out on all of the great hockey content as well on thehockeywriters.com. For Brandon, this is Jordan, and this has been Sabres Scoop. Until next time.